but we have three very interesting guys joining us live now in the stream because we are going to hold a discussion about the state of the marketing sector and the marketing technology used in that sector. So I'd like you please to welcome three protagonists from the sector. Jon Kelly, Managing Director of Wood for Trees, Rob Jones, CEO of Cubase, and Stuart Russell, the Chief Strategy Officer of Planning Inc., who join us live now. Thank you very much, guys, for dialing in and getting through all the technical challenges of joining us with three live calls. These three protagonists are great users of our technology, but also knowledgeable in the marketing sector. I hope together we can just discuss the state of the sector. So, Jon, if I start with you, as you're at the left-hand side of our display, what have you seen change in the marketing sector in the periods of lockdown that we've had in the COVID pandemic? How have your customers changed? How have teams changed? How's the work that you're doing at Wood for Trees changed? What do you think the impact has been?
Thanks, James. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Lots of answers to that question. I guess there's clearly been a change. The pandemic, had a big impact on everything we do. The sector that we largely work in is around charities, not-for-profits, and certainly saw them having to sort of adapt and innovate in terms of the way that they went to market with to their supporters. So a lot of channels suddenly became unavailable to them, face-to-face fundraising, event fundraising, retail, all these things were suddenly unavailable, and they had to adapt and react very quickly. Using new channels, looking at new products, a lot of virtual events, online events came up. Digital move to digital accelerated, but there was also some looking back at other channels that had been used historically, direct mail, TV, and the likes of those. So there was a big change to the way that they were doing things, and I think we saw this in other sectors. Restaurants suddenly having to turn to delivery models, suppliers to those restaurants, things like breweries having to sort of go to a direct customer sort of retail through online rather than through the pubs and restaurants that they would have typically marketed to. So, lots of rapid innovation went on, which was really good. I think the challenge now is, as things return a little bit to normal and somewhat back to the old ways, although I think we said we'd never go back to that. I think we quickly are. How do marketers now engage with their customers or their supporters, either through these new ways or through the existing ways or the ways that are coming back to them? What we saw with our clients was that they were opening up a lot of new audiences that they wouldn't have been speaking to, engaging with previously. But also, did they lose some of their previous audiences? And it's about understanding those different audiences they've got now, how they can engage with them, and doing a bit of everything. Going back to Andreas's talk this morning, the power of it's not one thing or the other thing. I've been a big believer in that for a long time, that if you do a bit of everything, you capture all and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, the hybrid approach certainly works. And I recall how important data became for the not-for-profit sector when all those real-world events were no longer possible. We can't do sponsored walks or coffee mornings or those sort of things. Actually, data became crucial, didn't it, in how to drive the business, and where we kind of expected to need to support our license holders in the not-for-profit sector. If anything, our data and software became more important for them.
Yeah, I think you find that at any times of disruption. We've seen this with economic downturns, in that suddenly that data becomes important. You've got to be more optimal. You've got to be more efficient. So using the data that you have, bringing in other streams of data, and I think it wasn't sort of new stuff. I think it just accelerated things that organizations have known that they've had to do for a long time, and suddenly it was, well, we've got to do it. We've got to do it now.
Yeah.
Next year isn't going to be good enough.
Perhaps if I turn to Rob, and Rob, I know you at Cubase do a lot of work for not-for-profits. How did you see their use of data change in the lockdown?
Yeah, it was mainly they needed to identify the individuals more than ever, so they couldn't rely on them turning up at events or coming to the shops, things like that. So that kind of reliance on data and the being able to communicate to a customer or a supporter rather was incredibly important. So they obviously lent more on the Apteco software and the stack, and we saw people starting to add lots more people stage journeys, for example, during that time. But we also saw them starting to reach out to other channels. So things like social and those kind of conversational channels became incredibly important because it gave them a face, it gave them some FaceTime with the customer, which they wouldn't usually get. And kind of looking at other sectors, we do quite a lot of work with B2Bs, and direct mail just stopped. I mean, it literally stopped because there was nobody that you could write to because everyone was at home and you don't have people's home address. So there was a huge move onto email, a clamour for kind of permissions and email addresses. And what we saw with the B2Bs was them starting to reach into consumer channels like Facebook and Instagram and advertising in those channels, which they'd never done before, but it was the way to get to their audience. And they're looking forward, we can see some of the things that people started to do, like the online events, for example, like we're on here. They're adding those now into the mix where they're saying, okay, we've got an event and it's going to be a hybrid event where we've got an online element to it and there's a face-to-face element to it. So I think things have changed now, and I think, yes, we are going back to some of the things that used to work before because we can, but I think there was a lot of innovation and new ideas which we'll stick with now going forward. So that's encouraging. So it's a one positive
indeed.
to take from the last 18 months.
Interesting. So direct mail working for B2C, but completely stopping for B2B. If I come to Stuart, I know, Stuart, you do work with B2C businesses. How did you see them change in the lockdown?
Yeah, we work with a lot of retailers who I think a lot of the trends that John and Rob were talking about there was seen through in that sector. There was obviously a huge focus on using data to send relevant messages based on the channels that were available for commerce. So being able to identify customers who were predominantly shopping in store and being able to migrate them into e-commerce and e-com platforms. But more generally, there was a trend really for retailers to have to migrate away from very transactional relationships with their customers and start thinking more about engagement strategies, which was born out of necessity. It was born out of, at times, stock being a problem, or indeed, obviously, the entire retail channel being shut down. But it's a useful trend for marketeers to take forward as they look to build up more long-term relationships with their customers.
Absolutely. And perhaps just now looking forward, Rob, where do you see that engagement work going in 2022? How do you see our marketing efforts building engagement in 2022? What do you think the changes are going to be next year?
Yeah, I think as we move forward, I think Stuart's kind of intimated a little bit of what the future looks like. It's all about customer experience now, and it's about that consistency of experience for each individual customer. So personalization, omni-channel kind of consistency, where you can engage with a brand, with a company through a whole range of different channels and communication mediums and experience exactly the same thing. And no matter which channel that you turn up at, that company knows who you are. And I think that's the big development over the next 12 months, where you'll see much more emphasis on identification of customers and trying to capture data.
I don't know if you were online. Sorry, I don't know if you were online earlier when we did the survey, but one of the responses was that people don't know how their organisation are handling anonymous and identified individuals. It's not a common technique yet, and I guess you'd see that at Cubase in the customer work that you're doing.
Yeah, and exactly. But the technologies like CDPs give you this incredible ability to be able to actually identify that there is somebody there, that it's not just a click on a website. It's actually, there's a person behind that click, and actually that person's visited your site 3, 4, 5 times and are in a consideration phase. And at some point they'll let themselves be known to you. And at that point you can put that unknown history together with the now known individual, and you can start to take some decisions about what you should do with that person. So you can analyze things like, okay, we see this person as being quite a high lifetime value for us, therefore we're prepared to spend a bit more on them. So we're prepared to, target them through additional channels, or we're prepared to send something through the post or something like that. Which, again, if you've got that technology and those capabilities set up, these things actually become quite trivial to do. But getting those technologies and that infrastructure and architecture in place is the challenge. And it's, I think what you'll start to see being discussed a heck of a lot more than you hear at the moment is something called data ops. So we're all kind of familiar with the concept of DevOps. Data ops is where you're basically getting the data to the people and the places that need it. That's the challenge. And I think that's what IT departments will be concentrating on next year, and then the marketing teams will be, okay, what can we do now with this data? How can we completely transform that customer's experience? Because we have access to all these incredible data points and events that we didn't have before. And I think that's what's going to happen next year.
That's great, and a really easy thing for us all to carry into next year, isn't it? What are we doing with DevOps? So, Jon, how do you see data ops being used in the not-for-profit world?
Yeah, nice term, Rob. Not come across that one yet, but yeah, I mean, it's, I think all these things aren't necessarily new things. They're things that we've been trying to do and should have been doing for a long time, as I said, and the pandemic sort of accelerated them to some degree. But bringing silos of data together so you can get that 360 degree view and understand your customers or supporters in a holistic manner rather than the sort of transactional manner that talked about earlier. So I think that's certainly set to continue, and I think it's where I guess CDP platforms like the Apteco suite can really help, because I think what we see is people wanting to do that, but thinking, right, we've got to do that in one big bang and get everything together and perfect before we can do anything with it. And the changing nature of the world we live in today means that if you take that approach, by the time you get there, things are going to be completely different and moved on. So it's about being able to address those, bringing that data together bit by bit and building up a picture rather than thinking, we've got to get this all perfect from day one.
Yeah, very, very much case of let's do what's practical now and make some progress. Stu, have you heard the term data ops? I kind of feel like that's what Planning Inc. do all the time, is delivering that data and delivering that to improve the customer journey and the customer experience.
Yeah, it's a great term to cover a lot of the value that we and agencies like us deliver. I think our kind of flavour of that is delivering marketing agility, and I think that's something that's really important for businesses to focus on: the ability to react really quickly to changing customer behaviours and accelerate the insight to action that they're able to get from the data. And I think, yes, there are a lot of enabling technologies that can do that, but I think brands need to be focusing on the people and process side of things to make that happen. And I think obviously Apteco's solutions are perfect for driving the agility that we're talking about here with the right teams around them.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd ever claim that we're perfect, but we're getting there. And the step forward with the real-time campaigning we demonstrated yesterday, I think helps with agility. I think it's been a frustration amongst our partner base and our customer base that we couldn't handle those immediacy challenges quite so neatly, and now we can, as we saw yesterday. So, Stu, your job title, Chief Strategy Officer. I think I have to pose you the question: what do you think the strategic change is going to be if we look beyond 2022, beyond surely the end of the sort of restrictions we're currently living under? How do you see the change and the marketing landscape beyond 2022?
Yeah, it's the big topic. I think at a super high level, the marketing landscape needs to embrace and enable the concept of empathy across the board, really. And I think there are a number of different threads to that. First-party data is going to become increasingly important as a growth asset to businesses with all the changes in cookie legislation and increasing awareness of privacy and indeed digital regulation that will be coming in. So brands need to really embrace that, but to get customers on board, there needs to be, you know, a privacy first strategy that they embrace, and then they need to roll that out with a very overt value proposition. I think customers are willing to give their data so long as they're assured that it's being managed and harnessed in the right way, and that they're getting something from the business. And then that concept of empathy then goes through into how brands are actually delivering their campaigns as well. Personalization and targeting, you know, increasingly important strategies within our world, needs to have that empathy lens put on it to make sure that we're delivering the customer experiences that we discussed a minute ago in the right way, and that we're not just personalizing to the moment, but we're acknowledging the wider context of what customers are operating. And code is a very extreme example of that, but we increasingly need to put a layer of sensibility around how we talk to our customers. And that extends into talking about purpose and sustainability, which increasingly should become very important themes for customer marketing teams to discuss. And then, with all of that in mind, with all the great ways that we can drive communications and harness data and talk really relevantly to customers, a big theme that will come out of that is the ability to produce content that marketeers can actually execute and activate those relevant campaigns. And I think a big focus for marketeers will be figuring out how they can scale out different types of content to different types of customer groups that can drive different types of customer journeys.
Excellent. So two interesting topics there, empathy and privacy in conjunction. And it feels like Andreas's keynote earlier today set the tone for some of that, didn't it? He talked about the power of and thinking about more than one approach, not just doing things because we can from a technology point of view, but the return to nuance he described. Jon, how do you feel about that challenge in the long term, the balance of empathy? I imagine the sector you support, or the sectors you support, that's a real important driver in their marketing messages in any case.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that switch. You can just see it in job titles and team titles. A lot of the fundraising teams that we used to work with are now engagement teams. So rather than looking at just that end transactional point, they are focused on the whole engagement picture and looking at other touch points through the journey that actually count for something, mean something, and you know, measuring those and using those as KPIs drives a different approach to marketing and the way you think about your supporters or your customers. So I think definitely seeing that and understanding that, you know, those multiple touch points all play a part in the engagement of your supporters. And that, you know, that comes back to bringing all that data together, giving people that same experience through the different channels, so that however they're interacting with you, they see you as the same entity. And I think, you know, those linear journeys that we used to talk about, you know, I get someone in on this method and I'll keep bombarding with them with that because that's how they're going to respond, are going to, you know, become less and less. And I think that's partly the way that people engage now. They will engage in lots of different ways and with lots of different organizations potentially. So rather than thinking you've got this one-to-one relationship with your customer or supporter, it's about being there when they're ready for you, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, and I think a particular example of that in the not-for-profit sector is the medical or health charities. We're actually looking at using our technology in the healthcare setting, and when we're working on data to do with long-term conditions, for example, you're not only dealing with supporters of that charity, but patients. And clearly the messaging that you use to a patient who has a chronic condition is very different. They are living that. And we heard about it from Andreas. He chose to disclose that he'd had a liver transplant because he wants to encourage people to sign up for organ donation. But not everybody would want their data used so freely. So managing data in a not-for-profit that's supporting medical topics, sensitive data like that, we have to really, well, it's very clear that that drives empathy and consideration of the messaging, but maybe we can take that approach and apply it to everybody who's engaging with our brand. Clearly most brands aren't to do with medical conditions, but if you took that care in how you dealt with every single individual, I think we would flourish. Rob, we only have a few minutes left. I think we'll credit you with the term data ops. It's a lovely phrase for us to use. Not your term, but okay, you brought it to our audience.
There's plenty of books on data ops if people
I'm
want
sure
to read
there are.
about
But just let's close out, just perhaps with your thoughts on the longer term development in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think some of the things that Stuart and Jon said there are really interesting, and the kind of idea of empathy is crucial. And I think what you'll start to see with companies and brands is that they're looking at how they can converse with a customer more. And what you're seeing at the moment is a whole heap of what we call conversational AI companies springing up across the world. And what they're doing is they're embedding computers to have conversations with customers where they understand and empathize with that customer about what their needs are, what they want, and then respond in real time. And I think what you'll start to see in the longer term, maybe 3 to 5 years from now, is that this will just become a common thing that you can contact your bank or your utilities provider or your retailer and actually be able to engage them in a conversation, albeit via a computer, but it will feel like a real conversation. And this is happening now. We're already seeing this happening in a few areas already. So, and I think that will kind of culminate this idea of empathy and that relationship. So yeah, I think that's something to look out for. I think in the next few years.
A great view, and imagine how significant marketing data is. It's going to be absolutely enmeshed in every one of those interactions. So marketing analytics, the understanding of where each customer or supporter is, the empathy to treat them well as a human, to bring back that sense of nuance that Andreas talked about earlier. I think that's a great challenge. Now, we're out of time.